Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you are all well and looking forward to another lesson. For this week, I thought we could do some pen and ink and wash. I'm just going to run through you some of the basic techniques. So what you can do is get any household object you have, anything that you have lying around that you wouldn't mind drawing and see how it goes. Even if it's a flower, just look at the petals, look at the shapes. For this, you just need your watercolor paper, 300 GSM I'm using. You can use thinner than that if you have a pencil. And I'm using these ink pens, which have 0.01, 0.03 and 0.05. A variation of marks, depending. I think for shading it's nice to use a 0.1. For drawing the outline, a 0.3 or a 5. So it also is a question of preference. So now I've got my studio chair and my bench, and it's really good perspective there. You might remember drawing boxes, 3D boxes at school a long time ago perhaps. You know, when you do your unbox and you do your angles. And just having a go, so anything you want to draw in perspective, any object like that, try and put a box around it. It'll give you what the perspective of it should look like, the angles. Put your box and see how it goes. Any object, works for everything, it's really good. For instance, like a bus. So I know that of my perspective, the vanishing point is towards the left, so the lines point in that direction. And then I put my end box around it, put some wheels and some windows, and you have a bus. You can see it's coming from a direction. So yes, I've drawn a box. Even my chair, I can draw the box and it gives me that sharp angle for the perspective of it. But I also get my pencil and I just put the pencil on top of that angle and move it across to the paper, and that also gives me my angles for the overall thing. I've drawn them both out in pencil here, just for practice. Anything that you draw is really good practice. Great mindfulness, very relaxing as well. So just look, take your time, observe the object that you're drawing. Measure it. So for instance, you can get a pencil and you lie it horizontally and it's quite long. If you move it around, you can see how that line shortens. The shape of it has become different. And if you move it even towards you, you're really just seeing that small, and look at that outline of that as a shape. So now it's just look at the outline of the object. That's the trick. So you can see when it's vertical on the paper, it is elongated. And just look at the length and measure everything, roughly. So now I'm going to introduce my pen and I'm going to do the outlines, but I'm not going to do everything in one continuous line. Going to break it up a little bit. Doing it in one continuous line is nice as well. It's a question of preference. To me it looks more like a cartoon, but then you might be wanting to draw a cartoon. It doesn't matter. It's what you prefer. So I do like to break up my lines very randomly, here and there, hardly anything. Just to me it looks better. Okay, just getting a few more lines in here. Also giving it some shading, so I like to try and look at the shades on the chair, or the shading where it's darker. Look at those as shapes, just on the edge there where it curves. And so I do the hatching, a bit of hatching on the chair, and it just gives me that darker area that make it looks curved. So I'm hatching in the direction of where I think the shade is going down. Also some measurements, just measuring. See how the distance of the thickness, that's in the perspective. I can see that line is much narrower. Now I'm just adding some of the shadows, but they are quite soft. And they're darker when it gets closer to the object, so you can see just by the leg of the chair how dark it is. Then it fades away slightly. So my lines, I stroke the pen and I lift it up so it goes thinner and lighter, softer looking. Adding some more hatching on the edges to get the shadow. Looking at the darker areas where I need to put them. So this is what I wanted to show you, is how the hatching makes it look, give it the shadow, the form, the light and dark that you need. The further apart the lines are, the lighter, and the closer they are, the darker. If you want to do a wood texture, you just have to put the swirls and little knot on the swirls and make wiggly lines, and that will give you the wood effect, going darker here and there. For a circle, this is a really good thing to practice on. Again, just hatching and cross hatching and making the lines closer together where they are darker. A bit more cross hatching, getting the shape, always going in the direction of the object. If it's rounded, do that, the line slightly curved. It doesn't have to be, it just helps it look, make it the form it should have. So going upwards again, very short lines and medium lines and tiny lines and really dark lines. You can see how it gives you that form. Here I've got the light coming from my left hand side. So on the stones I want to make the shadow on the right, and that will just give it that nice depth, to give it that 3D look. Just a tiny small cross hatching, darker marks. Here I've cross hatched and I've angled hatched and I've hatched any way I can possibly hatch, making the lines closer together and shorter as they go darker. Hope this helps with your ink pen techniques, and it's all about just a bit of practice. Okay, so I've done most of my cross hatching on the chair. Now it's time to get some colour on there. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to just rub out all the pencils marks that I've done, and maybe reinforce, because when you remove all the pencil marks you can see where you need darkening a little bit more here and there. You need to get the tonal values quite dark if you want the image to look 3D. So I'm just redefining some of the shaded areas. Here it goes from really dark, sharp to soft. And then also the shadow underneath the chair, just doing the hatches in the direction of that the floor is in. Same direction, I suppose, as the shadow from the legs, that angle. Just gives an indication of the shading, and it helps me to know where to put the wash on afterwards as well. Going up the wall, going in a different direction that the wall is in. So the cushion has got a curve to it. You can see that dark line in the picture. So I'm just hatching in the same direction that the cushion is going. So looking at the darker tones here of the red, I'm seeing that as a shape, but also in the direction that the chair, the object is. Again, here on the left, I can see that darker area as a shape, so I'm just going to hatch that in. Just give an indication of where the darker colour should be. Again, right here it's really curved, so it's like I showed you before on that white piece of card. The lines are taller and then they get shorter and shorter and shorter until it goes really dark, giving it that curved impression. Now it's ready for the paint, so I'm mixing up. I can see on my chair some yellow coming through that red, slightly bit orange, so I had some on my palette already, cadmium yellow deep. So I'm just going to block that in very loosely, not worrying too much about it. So I'm cleaning my brush, going to add some cadmium red or Windsor red, just all while it's still wet, wet on wet technique. Again, always looking at my reference picture, looking where the darker areas where I should put some thicker paint on. Just quite loosely, just painting it on, not taking too much care. It doesn't matter if it doesn't fill every single white bit on the paper. So now I'm mixing up my black, and I'm using burnt sienna or burnt umber, ultramarine and a bit of black. It gives it that nice deep, rich black, not a flat black. But as I'm putting it on and it looks quite dark, it will lighten about 30% the colour. So it'll be, I can go over it again on the edges where I think the darker side is, so it'll have that three-dimensional look. Now I'm going to use Payne's Grey, quite watered down, for the shadow underneath the chair. Just roughly block it in. If it bleeds through, that doesn't worry me. It all adds to the character of the painting. Not forgetting the shadow on the wall behind the chair. And it's just a little bit dark onto the right, onto the left I mean. So I thought I was finished at this stage and I signed it. Then I thought, no, it's a bit, I need something happening. So my usual flicks. I think that adds a bit of something to the painting. But I also thought, hang on a minute, let's do something different. I'm just going to use my water spray bottle and spray so that the paint on the chair flows off it. It adds an instant background. And I tilt the board and the paper just to make it flow in that direction. Now I'm spraying the bottom part of the chair, I want that to flow as well. Add more interest to the painting. Now it's completely dry. It has looked all the same tone everywhere, so I need to darken the chair and fade that background red into the background. So I'm going to glaze over the same colours again, a bit more dark red, quite a thick mixture. Again, looking at the darker shapes on my reference picture. I need to soften that edge, so I'm just adding clean water. And you see, not fiddling too much, just positive strokes. Darkening the edge where I feel it needs a bit more shadow to give it more form and shape, and around the stitching of the cushion. The chair, I feel, also needs a bit of darkening with a rich red, and in this case I'm using some cadmium red and just a thicker mixture of cadmium red.